I'm joined by Sweta Chakraborty. She's a risk and behavioral scientist. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, for people who aren't familiar with this, what are the main categories of bio-waste?
Sure. So if you think about the number of people that we have on this planet and the amount of food production that's required to feed them, it's not surprising how much of that probably does go to waste. In fact, it's about a third of all of the food produced, whether it's at the level where the food is beginning the agricultural process or with the end consumer. But 30% of that goes to waste. And you have to think about, where does that waste go? And what are the different kinds of waste? So whether it is that initial product that just never makes it through the food system, or whether it's what you pick up from the grocery store that you don't finish and you throw out, ultimately what you don't want to see happen is for it to end up in that landfill, for it to rot, and then for it to release methane gas, which is a very potent greenhouse gas that pollutes our atmosphere and it warms the earth. And so to avoid that, we need to think of methods to be able to deal with this 30% of food that ends up in the landfills.
Now, one of the methods we saw there were these cockroach farms. How viable is that in terms of a way of dealing with food waste?
Well, what a creative and innovative solution. And if you think about the number of people on the planet, we have 7.6 billion people on the planet. China has about 1.4 billion people on the planet. Cities like Jinan in China are experimenting with these innovative methods. And what a better place for it to see whether or not it works, how well it works, and if it can be scaled. And if something like this is working well, which it is, about a third of the food waste produced from the city of Jinan is being solved by these cockroaches, then this is something we can see move across not just China, but then export globally. And so this is the type of innovation we will need to deal with the numbers of people who are reliant on our food system.
And it's interesting because they're taking this biological approach. What are some other innovative approaches you're seeing that are biological?
Right. And so when you have food, what you're hoping ends up happening is that it reaches the people that need to eat it. Ultimately, the amount of food that is going to waste could be feeding those that are hungry 10 times over. So if we could repurpose that food so the people who really need it get it, or if it turns into animal feed, great, that's the whole point of food production. But because that doesn't happen, what we see is industrial uses for food. And so other means and methods include composting, where you are able to use masses of land to be able to create better soil and better nutrition in soil. So that's a great way to repurpose a lot of food waste. And then anaerobic digestion. And so that's when you use microorganisms, which is sort of another approach and another method for dealing with food waste, to be able to turn food into biogas. And that can be used for energy. So these are now renewable energies that can come from this biodegradable waste. And so
yes. Now, I do want to get to this issue because you did mention composting. Now, your average person essentially is a little too lazy just to do basic recycling. And you have countries like the UK where they include separating your food from your recycling and your regular rubbish as a way of really tackling it at the home before it ends up in some of these landfills. What are some of the policies that you think could really support better bio-waste management?
That's a great question. What you don't want is for you want policies that support recycling as opposed to those that benefit from moving the waste to the landfills. So if you can encourage and incentivize producers to move their food waste towards recycling facilities instead of incentivizing them to fill up the landfills, which is currently, unfortunately, the practice of preference, then you will see a lot more kind of natural incentives that encourage those practices. And that's what we need because, again, we are increasing the number of people on this planet. We're going to need to increase food production. And if we continue to have this amount of waste, then it's these types of creative innovations like what you see happening out of China that is going to be what deals with this food waste issue.
So put it in some context for us. What are some of the economic consequences of really not dealing with this bio-waste issue?
Right, and so I would actually even flip that and say, what are the economic benefits of these innovative methods? There is so much potential here for the economy if you can come up with some of these types of solutions that it becomes win-win. So not only do you have these products that would have otherwise filled up the landfills, but now you are repurposing cockroaches, let's say, for their 6-month lifespan to work for you to be able to degrade this waste and then repurpose it for nutrition purposes for animal feed. So it's almost an economic benefit full circle. And these are the types of things that we are just beginning to scratch the surface and see where a lot of the economic potential and benefit comes from. And if we can continue to incentivize in a way so that we are encouraging a renewable energy and food economy, then it's literally win across the board.
Hopefully people heed your advice. Thank you so much. Sweta Chakraborty there, a risk and behavioral scientist.